Hello, my name is Julia Volkman, and I'm here to speak about essentials every assistant needs to know for early childhood. This is going to be a quick review of some of the highlights from a little booklet I wrote called Gentle Guidance, Tips and Tricks for Assistant Teachers in Early Education. The big topics we're going to hit on today are protect concentration, setting the tone, and nurturing brain development. Let me start by giving you the big picture of the brain. The brain is always learning. On this picture here, you can see these round circles they're all neurons, a lot of neurons in the brain. And the round circles are the nuclei of those neurons, and the long skinny lines are the axons, the short skinny lines are the dendrites. So those are the connections. Now you can see what changes in age here. Over in this 2-year-old brain, you can see that there are not more neurons, not more black circles, but a lot more skinny lines, a lot more connections. So just by existing in the world, the young child is growing brain connections. Now, these brain connections are actually inefficient. And here's how you can think of that. You're trying to get from the start down here to the finish way up there. But how are you going to get there? There's no clear path. It's like a tangled jungle of connections. And this is why it takes children forever to do anything, because we're asking them to do something like put on your shoes, put on your shoes. Oh my gosh, put on your shoes. And their brain is doing loop-de-loops instead of going directly from the start to finish. So it's not their fault that they're slow. It's just their really overcrowded brain. Now, these underused connections get pruned away. It's inefficient to have the big crowd. You're making loop-de-loops and instead of going straight from start to finish. So the brain prunes them back, just like how we prune the branches on an apple tree to make it grow more fruit. The brain cuts back what we don't need, and it nurtures what we do need. That makes our connection stronger, and it means there's less competition for those signals to get through in the brain. It becomes more efficient, easier for the brain to do what it's doing. So Dr. Montessori's great quote that references this is, every unnecessary aid is an obstacle to development, because the child has to build their own brain. We can't do it for them. And I love this picture of her. You can see her, she's shown the child how to trace the shapes in this geometric cabinet. And now it's the child's turn, and she's watching. She's very passive. She's very unobtrusive. She's not distracting the child from the work the child needs to do. That is allowing the child to develop those strong connections. She has no distraction. She's doing one thing at a time. And in neuroscience, we say practice makes permanent. Okay? All right, so this learning, as we're learning, it's a lot of work. It's hard work for us. And that's one of the reasons Dr. Montessori was sitting there without making any noise, without distracting the child, because it takes a lot of brain resources to do the one thing we're doing when we're learning. I'm going to show you what this means in the brain when we think about reading. This picture is showing you the brain areas that a person uses when they're reading if they're an 11-year-old reader, okay? They use all those red and maroon and gold areas are areas that are active during reading. They need a lot of brain areas to read. Now think to yourself, what is that brain going to look like in a 38-year-old reader? What areas of the brain are they using to read? They're using hardly any of the same areas because our brain is so much more efficient. We don't need to use so many resources in the brain, right? So when we're learning, we have what's called a heavy cognitive load because it takes us a lot of energy to do what we're trying to do. But once we're an expert at it, once we've mastered it, it's easy. It doesn't take a lot of our brain energy to do it. I hope that's making sense. So when we're talking about the brain, the reason why this is so important for us to know when we're working in early education is that we are guiding brain development. Our work with young children is essential. And repetition is essential for the young child to really learn. The more they do something, the more efficient those neural networks get at what they're doing. They get stronger, more robust brains from repeating things. So in early childhood, we want to allow them to repeat things without being interrupted whenever we can. Also, learning takes a lot of effort. So we really want to do one thing at a time. So if they're doing something and we're busy talking while they're like doing something, we're like, okay, that was good. No, do it this way. No, do it that way. That's not helpful, because adding in that extra distraction of language, instead of for an adult, it might help us focus. But for the young child who's just learning language or just learning the task that they're working on, it's really adding in complexity and making it harder for them. So with early childhood, silence is great. Patience, going slow, very helpful for the brain to track one thing at a time. And this is why we like to actually move really slowly, gracefully, and quietly in the early childhood environment. So you can do things to help practice this, like just practice tucking in your chair. Every time you're getting up, tuck in your chair without making a sound, and then walk elegantly, gracefully away from your chair. You can practice that right now. You can practice putting something down without making a sound. Ooh, that was pretty good. You can practice walking around the space elegantly, carrying one thing at a time and using two hands to carry. If you're carrying a book, one book, two hands, right? That helps the young child, because the young child's hands aren't big enough and they're not coordinated enough to do what we can effortlessly do. We can carry 5 books, and tuck in our chair and walk around and talk with no difficulty. But for them, they're just learning how to do those very simple tasks. So isolating the difficulty, one thing at a time, and really focusing on elegant, slow, graceful movements can help tremendously in nurturing development. Now, this matters so much because one of the big things we're looking at in early childhood is attention, the ability to concentrate on whatever it is the child is doing so that they can focus that brain energy, focus right in on what they're working on. Dr. Montessori described it in terms of this wheel, of normal and what she called deviated character traits in children. And the deviations start over here on the right with extra social, like you don't want to be social, you're outside of social behavior. Moving up slightly to sloth, sloppy, timidity or being really shy, not just a little shy, being disordered, disorganized. Moving up to caprice, you're kind of whimsical. You're not really directed in what you're doing, but you're doing a lot of things. And then at some point, there's a line that you hit of concentration. Something calls you to concentrate and you focus. At that point, you move into the skillful part of the attention of this wheel, of character traits, and you start to see concentration. You start to see meaningful, purposeful, intentional work. You start to see inner discipline, not discipline from outside. This is referring to inner discipline. Sociability, where you're willing to help and engage with others, and even super social, which means you're going to help even if it's not in your best interest, but it's in the interest of the group. You'll help and you'll get involved. You're super social, guiding, leading, assisting others. Okay, love this graph. And again, concentration is the key to everything. So when we see concentration arrive, we have to protect it. Really, really protect it. We can't be chatting. We can't be saying, good job. We can't be saying, oh, try it again. Just quiet. Protect concentration, because all of the good stuff is going to follow from that. And if we can't get them to concentrate, we're stuck on the other side. Okay? So concentration is the key. Know your children, find what they're concentrating on, encourage them to do that work, and then get out of the way. Protect that concentration. Children don't arrive knowing how to concentrate. Those parts of the brain aren't developed yet, especially in young children. They're just developing. They need experience paying attention without being interrupted in order to concentrate. We have to be careful not to interrupt them, right? Okay. So to develop concentration, they may need us to help guide their attention. They don't know yet where to put their attention. That's one of the great jobs that we adults in the environment can do. So when we're working with them on something and they're finishing up, say we're reading a book together, instead of just saying, thanks for joining me for the book, and then they all go off hodgy-podgy all over the classroom, we can guide each child to something. We can say, think of what you would like to do next when you get up. what what would you like to work on? What activity is looking really interesting to you? And be slow and graceful and patient. Give them a turn. If they can't find that direction, language may be their challenge because they're not masters of our language yet. Even when they're speaking, they're not masters of understanding, and they may not know all the vocabulary in this space. So if they can't think of something, you could say, come over with me. I think over here on this shelf, you may find something you're looking for, and guide them in a physical way to some possibilities. You can be confident that something in your learning environment will call to the young child because your learning environment is carefully prepared for children developmentally, what they're drawn to at this age. So you can take a moment to practice this right now and think about what language you're going to use. Practice saying that language when you dismiss children towards work after doing an activity together. Practice makes permanent, so it's really important that you pause and actually try to say the words right now. Okay, I want to make one point really clear, is that the part of the brain that actually understands, Wernicke's area, it actually develops before the part of the brain that helps us speak, Broca's area, and works on grammar. So this is why children can understand us before they can necessarily speak out loud and answer us. And you see this so obviously when you have a child and you're like, oh, you're introducing them to someone. Hi, this is my child. This is my friend Sarah. And Sarah says, oh, what's your name? And the child just stares. It doesn't say anything. And you know the child knows their name, but they're not saying anything. Okay, that's because they understand, but they may not be able to produce it yet. It's hard work for the young child to do it. And this is also why we really need to be careful about what we're asking of the children in the learning environment. If you want them to show you something, say, show me your foot. Show me, that's what the picture is giving the example of. Show me your coat. Where is your coat? Let's go find it together. If you just say, what's that called? What is it? That's much harder for them to do. They have to figure out the right language, and then they have to produce it. So a lot of times if we supply the language for them in early childhood, it's really helpful, and it can avoid a lot of tantrums and just difficulties that the children don't have to experience. So remember to give them the language. Whenever you can, give them the language. They won't be bored. They won't think you're talking down to them. Give them the language, and it can be incredibly helpful. If you're encountering these kind of this kind of upset in the classroom often, pause and reflect and see, was the adult or was somebody else asking them to do something they couldn't do? Is that why they're upset? Are they feeling ineffective in their capacity? Okay, so try to remember, give them the language. Don't ask them to supply it unless you're sure they know it. Okay, because optimal development really hinges on strong relationships. So every time we're interacting with the children, we're building those relationships. It's so helpful for the children to have that support and know that they're cared about and cared for in their learning environment, that they matter to you. Super important to have these relationships, particularly because strong relationships act as a buffer against stress. I want to talk about stress for a minute. This is really important when we think about how the brain handles it. Stress is really tricky for the brain. This image is showing you how the brain has a lot of activity in the front, this frontal part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, when it's interested or engaged or focused on something, when life is just going along, right? That's where the activity is. And that higher thinking area in the front, it's kind of in charge. It's kind of regulating what the rest of the brain is doing, right? So you're here, and this is the big player prioritized in all the brain's activities. Now let's say that someone comes in and corrects you. Someone says, what the heck are you doing? Or that's wrong, or yells at you. Let me show you what happens in the brain. All that activity leaves this frontal part of the brain, and it moves into our fight or flight system, our emergency response area, the limbic system. We lose our ability to think straight physically when we are triggered into an acute stress response. Now, not everybody is triggered by the same thing, but we also can't always tell if we've triggered someone. They may just be quiet. it might be that they're having a stress response. And this is one of the reasons we try not to interrupt, we try not to correct, but instead we try to represent whatever it is the child's having trouble with. Instead of saying, you can't do that, that's no good, you're wrong, no way, whatever. Even if we're feeling playful, it doesn't always work that way with a young child. They need a chance to be supported in what they're doing, and we don't want to accidentally trigger this stress response because it really robs them of the possibility of thinking clearly. So when we're helping children, we try to do as little as we can so that they can be independent, so that they can grow their own strong neural networks, but we don't abandon them. We have to support them and scaffold them. So we want to get their hands engaged in the process. Say they're sticking their foot out in front of you, asking you to tie their shoe. You can engage them in the process and say, you can do the first part. Show them the first part is just pulling the laces tight, or the next part, just crossing over the laces. Break it down into parts and engage them as much as they can in doing each of those parts. When it's your turn to do the part they can't do yet, require them to watch what you are doing, okay, for them, right? So be patient, be like, can you see it? Look at my fingers right now. Guide them down to what you're doing so that they have a chance to absorb it and learn it, okay? You can practice this right now by trying to help somebody put on their shoe or help them zip up their coat, okay? How can you do it so that the other person's hands are involved in the process as much as possible, that they're engaged in the process, and you're only doing the tiny part that they can't do? Okay. Good to practice, really. It seems like it's easy to do, but if you don't pause and practice, you get there and you're like, oh, wait, what was I supposed to do? Practice it now. It'll be easier for you to do later. Okay, so you know that you're a role model for these young children. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the science about why and how we're role models for children. Children actually physically change their brains to become like the brains of the people around us. This is wild. It has to do with a part of our brain called mirror neurons, which you may have heard about, and they make us experience to a lesser degree what we perceive other people are experiencing. Let me tell you the story about how this was discovered. There's a scientist, and he's trying to get this monkey to do something. Okay, the monkey has a little wire cap on, the EEG cap, and the monkey's not giving him good data. So the scientist is getting a little crabby, and he takes a break, and he starts eating peanuts. He's eating peanuts. Now the monkey wants the peanuts. So the monkey's like going, hey, give me a peanut, give me a peanut. And the scientist is like, I am not giving you a peanut, right? And so then, big smart scientist, what does he do? He sticks out his tongue at the monkey, right? And then what happens? The monkey sticks his tongue out at the scientist. Because he had the little cap on, they knew what was happening in the monkey's brain. And when the monkey saw the scientist stick out his tongue, and when the monkey stuck out his own tongue, the same parts of the brain were active. The same parts were active, whether he did it himself or perceived that somebody else was doing it. This has tremendous implications for our work with children. It really shows us how important our behavior is when we're around young children. It really shows us how much our ability to be our best selves, to model kind and gracious and skillful behavior matters to the children and the other people that we're with, all because of mirror neurons. Okay, and this also explains why when you hear your friend in the other room open a bag of potato chips, and you can't even see them, but all of a sudden your mouth starts watering and you're like eating the chips. You can't even see the chips. That's your mirror neurons working, okay? That's how they work. So our behavior matters for everybody around us. For anybody who can perceive our actions, we're affecting their brain. And Dr. Montessori knew this. She said the child reproduces in himself as by a form of psychic mimesis. Mimesis means like copy machine. The characteristics of the people in his environment. Reproduces in himself the characteristics of the people in his environment. She was talking about mirror neurons before anybody discovered mirror neurons. So our choice of words, our behavior dramatically affects those around us, right? So this is why one of the things we like to do with early childhood is teach good manners. We're teaching it through our own behavior by saying please and thank you and not yelling across the room to get somebody's attention, but walking over and politely getting their attention. But these behaviors, we can teach them to the children. And if you ever pause and notice the things that make you bananas when you're with the children, like, oh my gosh, this kid's always yelling across the room, or this kid pushes, or this kid is just rude and grabs. Those are all behaviors that the children can be taught to do more skillfully. And we can decide what matters most to us in our learning environment, in our culture of our classroom or school. And then we can turn those behaviors into little grace and courtesy lessons. Work with your co-teacher to figure out which ones are most important to you. And then practice them. Practice saying thank you. Practice offering help. Practice lining up without pushing someone. Practice how to politely get someone's attention, how to ask for and wait for a turn. And then role play that with the children. First, practice it with your co-teacher, and then do it with a few children. Invite them to take turns role playing that good behavior with you. It's quite fun. Be like, oh, we're doing our special polite behaviors today. And then you do it. It's fun. It's a good game that the young child is interested in because of the nature of their brain's development. Okay. Now, a lot of times we have moments when we just need to do something fun with the children so that they don't get into mischief. Say we're in a line and we have to wait for some reason. We want to have what I call pocket lessons, things we can just pull out of our pocket and share with the children so that they are directed in a skillful way and they don't get into mischief. Some things we can do are tongue twisters. They love tongue twisters and it's so wonderful for their language development. Here's one that I like. Say it. Red leather, yellow leather. Red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather. It's hard and it's fun. There's so many tongue twisters that you can play. Memorize a few so you can pull them out of your pocket and use them when you need to guide the children towards something skillful. Poems and songs, of course, very important. And these don't have to be obscure. These can be old ones. These can be Starlight, Starbright, First Star I See Tonight. This can be Row, Row, Row Your Boat. You can also use many new songs. They're wonderful, but it's okay to repeat, to use what you already know, and then over the course of time, learn more so you can keep it interesting. Also, reading books together and speak with your co-teacher about how they like to read books. Some people like to hold it up and look at it this way. That's how I like to do it. Some people like to read it and then show it to the children. There's many actual physical ways to read the book together. So ask your co-teacher what they prefer and then follow that same approach to sharing a story with the children from a book. You can also tell true stories about your life. This helps develop relationships with the children, and it also helps model for them how they can share true stories about their own life. These should be 1 to 2 minutes. They should be grounded in positivity or be neutral stories, and they can build your relationships. It could be about the time you had to you open a can of tuna to lure your cat down out of a tree. It could be the time you just were busy that morning and you spilled your coffee on your blouse. Aww. Very short, but interesting, builds relationship and helps the children see how do you respond to, how do you cope with different situations that are normal and come up in life. It gives them ideas, inspiration, and role model. Okay? Always, whenever you do an activity with them, remember to dismiss them towards work when you finish that activity. What we're trying to do is help the children develop their levels of inner discipline. Now, we're going for a level 3 when they do something just because it needs to be done. And that's that super social part of that graph we saw earlier. They notice something needs to happen and they just do it. For example, I know a story a friend of mine was teaching, and a child in their class had an asthma attack, a really bad asthma attack. He was lying on the floor, and all the children were gathered around, and the teacher went in there, and she's like, oh, we need to get your inhaler. But as she said that, someone from the outside, one of the children, threw the inhaler over, and it landed in the middle so that the child who needed it got his inhaler. Nobody asked the child to do that. He just did it because he knew it was needed. That's the third level of discipline. The second level of discipline is when children will do something because we ask them to do it. Okay? would you please bring me a tissue? I have a runny nose. And then they bring you a tissue, okay? The first level of discipline is they'll only do it if they want to do it. Somehow they're internally motivated. Many of our children in early childhood arrive at that first level of discipline. We can't force them to be at level 2 or level 3. It's a part of natural development that they get there. Instead, we can notice where they are. And then, if they're at level 1, we don't say, would you like to line up now? We say, it's time to line up. Come with me. We're not going to give them a choice if they're unable to make a skillful choice. We're going to guide them towards that choice. As they get older, as they get into that second level of discipline, that's when we start to give them more and more choices. I hope that's making sense. And then they'll get there to that third level. Even in early childhood, you will see children at that third level of discipline given time and skillful means with which to practice their brain development and their growing skills. Okay, now sometimes there's going to be mischief. We have to work with mischief. We can't get around it. And the thing is, mistakes are pretty predictable in early childhood. We know what is likely to happen. Sometimes they're going to push. Sometimes they're going to grab. Sometimes, maybe not in your classroom, you may get a biter or two, right? You may get children who are yelling across the room instead of being polite, that are interfering with other people's activities. These are predictable behaviors. The thing to know is that if it's predictable, we can offer those good manners lessons to help the children learn what to do before the problem arises. So at the beginning of the year, we're giving a lot of these manners lessons, a lot of grace and courtesy lessons to help them understand what to do when common situations arise, how to behave really nicely, how to behave well. Now, if they're doing something that is dangerous, destructive, or demeaning, we have to get in there right away. We have to help the children stop what's happening and redirect them to something skillful. Remember, if we go in right away, we may be triggering that acute stress response, so it's not a teachable moment. The teachable moment is later, at a neutral moment, when you can give those grace and courtesy lessons to help address the specific thing you had to intervene with, right? So you don't necessarily have to intervene right away for other things unless it's dangerous, destructive, or demeaning. Okay? Now let me tell you some ideas about how to intervene when you do need to intervene. First, we really love indirect intervention. And the way some ideas for this is to do things like just show up nearby. You see like something's like, what's going on there? And you're like, I'm just going to go stand right next to the children who are getting into a little trouble. Okay, just stand next to them. Sometimes your being close to them is enough to rouse their awareness to other things and outside of, instead of being narrowed down on what they're concerned about or upset about, it may open their awareness a little bit. So just show up and stand near them. Another thing to do if two children are kind of getting at each other, you can just go right in between them, like accidentally, like, oh, I just need to straighten this shelf, or I'm looking for something on the shelf. Like you just make something up, pretend you need to be there, and just get busy physically in between them. That often will diffuse things because they have this moment to be like, what's happening? And they're, again, no longer narrowed down. They start to open up to what's happening in the rest of the world. You can also, if none of this is working or you can't be physically close to them, you could just go, oh, what was that? And like pretend, oh, I'm so sorry. I thought I saw something. That is kind of a last resort because it can distract children, draw the attention away from the work. But if you're really in a pinch, it can help sometimes. Okay, now what if those indirect options don't work or aren't an option in that moment? You can respectfully go to the child. Quick, quiet, and discreet. Tell them, I'm sorry, we can't do that. So here's an example. That is damaging this. We can't let that happen. Let's put this away together and then find something else to use. So hopefully you're trying not to trigger a stress response, but you're also not allowing something that's inappropriate. You're setting a firm and clear boundary. Firm and clear boundaries are just a wonderful support for the child during early development. Really, and all through development. Very helpful to have firm, clear, and gentle boundaries that make sense. So again, I encourage you right now to pause and to practice so that you can be prepared. You don't want to trigger that stress response. And if you're experiencing a situation in the classroom where the children are getting into trouble, you may have a stress response. You may get triggered. If we practice these behaviors, they can be really strong, efficient neural networks for us so that it doesn't increase our cognitive load. It's easy for us to use that part of the brain to respond skillfully. So practice what your language would be. You know what the situations might be that arise. What language are you going to use? How are you going to skillfully redirect them? Practice it, practice it, practice it. Then it will be easier to do it when you actually need it. Now, our overriding goal through everything is that we're trying to support independence because we can't build their brains for them. They're not an empty bucket that we just glug, 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 fill up all of our knowledge into. No, they have to create their own brains. Anything they do repeatedly, the brain gets more efficient at. So we need to support them by letting them be independent. So does our learning environment support that independence? One way you can find out is you can crawl through your classroom. Get down on your hands and knees. This is early childhood. They're little people. Crawl around and see what can you reach that you're supposed to be able to reach. What can't you reach? What do you have to get help for? Think about the bathroom. Can you work that faucet? Is it a two-handed faucet turn or is it a one-handed turn? Can you get the paper towels? Do you need two hands to get them? Probably, right? How can you work the soap? It's probably a two-handed event, right? Do everything and remember that the children aren't efficient at any of these tasks yet. They need us to move slow and purposefully and analyze the physical movements we have to make to get things done, right? And every time, once you get into the classroom and the children are with you and you're noticing that they're always asking you for something, like every day at some point the children come over and they're like, oh, we're out of paint. Can you refill the paint? Or they come over and they need something. Write down what it is they're asking you for help with. Our intention is to remove those obstacles. They're barriers to the children's independence. They interrupt concentration and they make the children feel dependent rather than independent. So write those things down when a child is asking you for help and speak with your co-teacher. How can we change our physical environment or our invisible routine environment so that the children can be independent? What can we do? With the paints, maybe you have like a ketchup squirt bottle that the child can get and refill it into your other container that the child can do independently. Think about possibilities. You are very resourceful and quite intelligent and you can do it. You can figure out a way that the child can do it. And then you'll put it on YouTube for us or TikTok and we'll all watch it and get 1 million views because it's so cool. Okay, so remember, always trying to support them towards independence. Always, always, always. That's key for everything. And gently caring for them, having positive relationships with them. Okay, we've finished most of what we're going to talk about, and I want you to pause. Definitely, I'm really good about the pausing. And right now, write down for yourself some SMART goals. Research shows that SMART goals can be really helpful in letting you accomplish what you'd like to accomplish. A SMART goal is specific, measurable, action-based, realistic, and time-bound. So maybe your SMART goal is to talk with your co-teacher and make a list of the things that make you bananas about behavior in the classroom. And then decide what lessons to give. Maybe that's your first SMART goal is just to make that list. Your second SMART goal, and you're going to make that list on Tuesday morning. Okay? And then you're going to write it down. After you have the list, you're going to say, okay, Wednesday, during our prep time, I'm going to meet with my co-teacher, talk about the list, pick one thing, and practice a grace and courtesy lesson. Those could be 2 achievable SMART goals. All right, so please pause the video for a moment and write down those SMART goals, and then I have a few more things to share with you. So through all of this, our attitude toward the child is what Dr. Montessori describes here. We must give the child the means of self-creation and encourage him. Courage, my dear, courage! You are a new man that must adapt to this new world. Go on triumphantly. I am here to help you. I love that quote. I wish she said them instead of him, but I love that quote. Okay. If you'd like more resources, my company, Maitri Learning, has a lot of free resources on the website that can help. If you go to this menu and you go to For Teacher Parents, there's a sub-menu with lots of resources there, as well as on the blogs, and free downloads also under the digital section here. If you like social media, you can follow us on at Maitri Learning on Instagram, Facebook, everything, TikTok, at Maitri Learning. And if you want to participate in research, you have an opportunity to put your name into the Montessori research pool. Anybody who works with children in Montessori, assistant teachers, parents, grandparents, anybody is welcome to sign up. If you sign up, it doesn't mean you'll be included in a research study. It just means that researchers have the possibility of contacting you if there's a study that your demographics fit and you might be included in, and you have the choice to do it. And now I have a bunch of references. I actually didn't make any of this up. All is researched, and I hope that you found this useful and that you're really enjoying your work with young children. It's a gift to be able to show up every day and just see these beautiful little souls, just so open and eager and ripe to learn. So I wish you tremendous good fortune in your work, and thank you for listening.